sanctions, populism, friendshoring, de-risking, the deepening division of the world into two opposed camps, trade wars, technology wars, and wars pure and simple. What is today called the crisis of multilateralism is in reality a crisis of US supranationalist cosmopolitanism or US imperialism. So I've entitled my talk, Crisis of Western Imperialism, Opportunity for the World Majority. You can doubt that the world's inherited institutions of international economic governance, erected after the Second World War, are in profound crisis. Sanctions, populism, friendshoring, de-risking, the deepening division of the world into two opposed camps, trade wars, technology wars, and wars pure and simple, like the ones that are going on precisely in this neighborhood, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. These are among the proliferating causes. The crisis is said to be one of multilateralism, by which is meant the practice of international negotiation among a large number of the world's countries, if not all of them, to conclude common agreements for mutual benefit. Those who label the crisis in this way call for a revitalization of this practice. However, multilateralism is actually thriving. The world majority, that is to say, the bulk of the world which is not included in the West, have tired of waiting for the imperialist West in its current dangerously petulant huff to demonstrate its much-touted multilateralism, and is getting down to the business of negotiating a still expanding set of alternative institutions, whether of trade or credit or investment or payments. And there is more to come in the upcoming BRICS summit in Kazan later this month. The United States led West, by contrast, and I will use the term to refer to the imperialist core of the world economy, as it was when the capitalist imperialism peaked in 1914, plus a small number of hangers-on that it has acquired since, as most clearly seen in a map of the countries that is imposing sanctions on Russia today. So this US-led West, which has for so long arrogated to itself the title of the keeper of the flame of this multilateralism, appears hell-bent on destroying the institutions it touted as its major achievements, until recently, whether by weaponizing the dollar system, undermining the institutional core of the World Trade Organization, which is its dispute settlement mechanism, or bending the IMF's rules, for instance, against lending to a country at war, not to mention turning key United Nations agencies into playgrounds of corporate and Western NGO power. It's high time we woke up to the real content of the crisis. The structures of international economic governance burst after the Second World War were not pure and simply the work of multilateralism, but rather the vector sum of opposed forces and opposed principles. What do I mean by that? On the one hand, we had the United States. It sought to replace Britain as the managing segment of the world economy since the early 20th century, when it sensed that British power was waning. Having botched its first attempt to do so after the First World War, and according to its own leading intellectuals, I'm thinking of Henry Luce, the publisher of Life and Time magazines, got a second chance with the Second World War, it came to the negotiations at Bretton Woods and elsewhere, seeking supranational rules, essentially world laws, itself masquerading as world state, that is, the United States saw itself as essentially the substitute for the world state. And these ambitions, which the United States had already nursed by then for several decades, are the true origin of the theory of US hegemony, not any real state of affairs waiting to be theorized. The United States, at Bretton Woods and elsewhere, and this historical conjuncture, sought to transform the rest of the world into the equivalent of domestic territory, making national states redundant, fusing the world economies into a seamless whole for the benefit of US corporations, including by diminishing its allies' empires. As Karl Polanyi put it in a remarkably insightful article, in 1945, the United States wished to return to a pre-1914 system of universal capitalism, when in fact, as he put it in his great book, The Great Transformation, it had collapsed once and for all and could not be brought back to life. This is what had happened in the 30 years crisis of 1914 to 1945. And the world, as Polanyi saw it, had objectively inclined towards planned economies and sought multilaterally derived international rules and norms that would enable and foster them. This universal capitalism that it sought, the United States deployed the extraordinary dominance that it had acquired over the world's economy as the only ally which, while suffering no war damage, expanded its economy and loan portfolio as never before as supplier of war material and credit to its allies. You see here a chart of US growth since the 1870s to about 2000. And the two big peaks you see there are the two world wars. You can see that the two world wars were the thing that really expanded the US economy. It's no wonder that the US economy is so addicted to wars. So that was the United States on the one hand. The opposed force was the rest of the world, which consisted of the United States' war-torn allies, as vulnerable to economic collapse as to the charms of communism, in an age when Uncle Joe was more popular in Europe than Uncle Sam, both at home and, of course, also in the sprawling empires of Europe. There was the Soviet Union and East European communist countries with their planned economies. And then there were the demands of the rest of the world, whether these countries were independent, as in Latin America and much of West Asia, or soon to be independent in Asia and Africa. And these demands were for industrialization and development. None of these three categories of countries could withstand the sort of liberal economy the United States sought to create without suffering economic damage and subordination, and they had no intention of doing so if they could help it. The story of the establishment of the structures of international economic governance after the Second World War is intelligible only if we understand that they were the outcome of an ongoing clash between these two principles of US supranationalism, sometimes helped by its allies and sometimes hindered by them, and the multilateralism of the rest of the world. The best way to understand US supranationalism is to understand that it as economically cosmopolitan. The German mercantilist Friedrich List used this expression in the mid-19th century to describe the sort of world order as envisaged by the then dominant capitalist country, Britain, designed for the benefit of British capital. A world opened up through formal or colonial or informal semi-colonial control for its commodities and capital, and to supply it with cheap commodities and labor. To this, List opposed the international world. So the cosmopolitan world is on the left here. It has no borders. It is simply a world over which the privileged, which can be controlled from London or New York or what have you. List, however, proposed a different type of world. To List, the world was international, a world of nation states, because he understood, as well as many others, including the United States' own Alexander Hamilton, and mercantilists like Henry Carey, like Marx, like Keynes, and like today's development state thinkers, that a world in which some nations have already industrialized and therefore can command world markets, the only way for further industrialization, which is key to development in other nations, the only way for them to escape the fate of being subordinated to the dominant capitalist countries, of being their hewers of wood and drawers of water, is through the use of protection. And the entire slew of policies, infant industry protection, industrial policy, directed credit, export promotion, subsidies, tariffs, capital controls, among others. While such state-directed industrialization projects may fail, indeed we can see from the record of post-war attempts to develop in the Third World that there is absolutely no guarantee that they will succeed. No development is possible without them. This was as true in the late 19th century, when Germany, the United States itself, and Japan industrialized, as it was after, when the Soviet Union did, and in the mid and late 20th centuries when European economies and Japan recovered, or in the 60s and 70s when South Korea and Taiwan province industrialized, as it is true today as we see from China's industrialization. I will say parenthetically that it would be very useful to bear in mind that the word globalization is used in China in a very different way than it is used in the rest of the world, especially in the US-led world. In the latter, it means basically free markets and free trade, whereas in China, it means more trade through managed trade.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。